Welcome everybody to today's special federal election webinar entitled Our Children, They Don't Vote, But They Do Matter. It's actually the title of the policy document which ARACY has just launched of the same name. I don't know if that can be seen. But before I go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which all participants of this webinar stand and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also particularly like to acknowledge Indigenous colleagues who may be joining us today. Today we'll hear from Penny Dakin, Chief Executive of the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth, or ARACY. Penny was appointed CEO in January 2019 after acting in the role since July last year, and Penny's had a long history with ARACY before that. Today's webinar is the first in a series in the lead up to the coming federal election, which is due in May this year. During these webinars, you'll hear from a number of partner organisations of ARACY's about what they see as priorities for whoever forms the next Australian government when it comes to good policy and good outcomes for children and youth in Australia. So as I said last week, Penny launched ARACY's policy recommendations for the next Australian government. That document's entitled Our Children, They Don't Vote, But They Do Matter. And that was largely informed by an analysis piece that ARACY launched just a few weeks earlier called To Have and To Have Not, which was a study of deprivation experienced by Australian children across the 6 domains of the NEST, which is ARACY's centrepiece of research. Anyway, without further ado, I'll hand over to Penny and ask her to talk to you more about Our Children, They Don't Vote, But They Do Matter.
Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it, and I'm really excited to be delivering today's webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us as we kick off this 2019 federal election webinar series. We're delighted to be able to host these events in the lead up to the federal election, and we're convinced that they're going to be a powerful tool to inform the outcomes once the next Australian government is in office. It's important that we as a group of committed stakeholders can have opportunities like this to come together and to discuss how we can better work and better prioritise outcomes for our kids and how we can see our kids getting a better deal. I'd like to echo Paul's acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and my respects to Indigenous colleagues who are joining us today. As Paul's just indicated, we did officially launch this document last week at the Fiona Stanley Forum in Melbourne. That was a fantastic event, and if we've got any people online who are also there, it's a pleasure to have you back. At that event, over 70 people gathered to reflect on the priorities that I'm about to outline, and even more than the listening to me and to Fiona talk about the priorities, what I was really delighted to see was that after all of the talking was done, many partner organisations stayed around and discussed how we can actually bring to life these recommendations and priorities over refreshments. Whilst not exactly the same, we are hoping that this online format will allow you to come together as the many and varied partners of ARACY to do likewise. Before I go into today's policy document, I just wanted to take a brief moment to thank you, the people who have joined. As Paul has indicated, I have recently been appointed into the CEO role at ARACY, having acted since mid-last year. I want to thank you for your many messages of congratulations and support since that time. It's meant a lot to me as an individual, and it's meant a lot to us as an organisation. So thank you for that support, and thank you for your ongoing willingness to work alongside and with ARACY. Since last year and my appointment, ARACY has undergone a period of significant renewal. We have really looked at who we are and, more importantly, why we are. We have refocused on our core vision that children and young people in Australia are loved, thriving and realising their potential. We've gone back to basics. We've looked at our mission, our purpose and our values. We are in many ways the same, but with an invigorated focus and a new commitment. We've been reminded of the power of collaboration to change outcomes. We again have a laser-like focus on that word alliance. It sits in the centre of our name, and it also sits in the centre of who we are, why we are, and what we do. And this document is a testament to that renewed approach. It's an evidence-based collaboration designed to make a national difference in the lives of our children. We have built this document and the priorities it contains with our partners, organisations and individuals. In seeking out ideas, we could have pulled together a long and exhaustive list. There is a lot that we could do for our kids. Instead, we chose to focus on the concrete, on things that are nation building and within the control of the Commonwealth Government. As such, it's a privilege to share this document and its contents with you. But, as I said in Melbourne, and I still feel, it's a shame. It's a shame we have to develop this document at all. It's a shame organisations like ARACY need to exist. But we do, and everyone we work with does. We are as needed today as we have been in the past. This is apparent in the data we see, and I'm sure you all see every day. As Paul said, ARACY recently developed and released the report on deprivation faced by Australian kids. Based on the longitudinal study of Australia's children and ARACY's evidence-based framework, the NEST, to have and to have not has been a watershed for us. It examines the extent to which Australian children are having their needs met in key and interlocking areas of wellbeing that were identified in the NEST. These areas are that children need to be loved and safe. They need to have their material basics met. Children need to be healthy. They need to be learning. They need to be participating. And by that we mean participating in community and participating in the decision making that surrounds them. They also have to have a positive sense of their own culture and identity. In summary, to have and to have not found, almost 40% of kids aged 10 to 11 are deprived in the health domain. 1 in 10 kids are showing signs of social and emotional stress by the time they are 6 or 7 years old. Almost a third of kids, 28%, aged 8 to 9, face bullying and exclusion. The report delved deeper into the plight of kids we know do it tough. Those with disability, those living in poverty, and those living in jobless homes. I want to note here that we would have loved to have been able to look at the outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids as well. Unfortunately, we couldn't. The data just didn't exist. We found that children with disability, while genuinely engaged and included at home, are more likely to be experiencing significant social exclusion, both at school and in the community. They are also more likely to experience deprivation across all 6 domains, including being around twice as likely to have mental health concerns. We found that children living below the poverty line suffered effects far wider than just their material basics. For example, they are more than 1.7 times more likely to face food insecurity and are more than twice as likely to be missing out on learning at home. However, of the 3 groups we studied, children in jobless families fared the worst of all. They were more than 4 times more likely to be homeless than kids in families where an adult worked, nearly twice as likely to be bullied or face social exclusion, and more than twice as likely to be missing out on learning at home. Combining findings from ACOS that 739,000 Australian children, or almost 1 in 5, lived below the poverty line, it's pretty clear to me, and I'm sure to many of you as well, that for many, this is not necessarily the lucky country. These are real kids facing real challenges that make their lives miserable and in many cases, sadly, unbearable. This is a problem for these kids today and sadly a problem for their future as well. ARACY's strong foundations, getting it right in the first 1,000 days partnership, found that deprivations experienced during the first 1,000 days of life can have lifelong effects. If you haven't seen the evidence work produced by our partners at the Centre for Community Child Health on this issue, I urge you strongly to check it out. It's available through ARACY's website or through the Centre for Community Child Health. Indeed, adult conditions such as coronary heart disease, stroke, diabetes and cancer are now being linked to pathways that originated prior to or during those essential first 1,000 days of life. This can mean enormous cost to the child and to the community and to the nation for years to come. As I said earlier, this data makes it clear that this document, ARACY, and all our collaborators are still needed. We are needed because there are kids in Australia today who we as a community are failing. These kids are largely silent. They do not vote, but they do matter. And it's up to us to ensure that our political leaders know this and act on it. Election years provide a unique opportunity in this regard. And in case you've been asleep, this is an election year. That's why we've developed They Don't Vote, But They Do Matter, and why we're all online here today. They Don't Vote, But They Do Matter provides the next Australian government with practical policy settings to alleviate the deprivation faced by Australian kids. True to ARACY's purpose, it is done so based on the evidence of what kids need, the evidence of what works for kids, and collaboration across our sector. I'll turn now to each of the policy recommendations that are included in the document. Let's start at the top, and I mean that literally. We've called our first policy recommendation, Putting Our Kids on Top of the List. Under this recommendation, we call for two important changes that would show that the next Australian government is serious about our kids. First, we call for the next Australian government to appoint a cabinet-level minister responsible for the wellbeing of Australia's children and young people. Their job would be to ensure alignment of policy settings, service delivery and efforts across Commonwealth agencies and other jurisdictions through the Council of Australian Government. Given the centrality of our children and young people to the wellbeing of the nation, we believe this portfolio should sit with the Prime Minister. Second, we believe COAG should never meet without reporting on the wellbeing of Australia's children and discussing how they can improve it. This is another reason the PM should also be the Minister for the Wellbeing of Australia's children and why this should be formalised in the administrative arrangement orders. Stemming from our first recommendation, ARACY joins our colleagues at Families Australia in calling for a national child and family wellbeing policy. Such a policy will require leadership from the top, hence our first recommendation. It will need to be based on evidence. We suggest the NEST. We touched on the NEST before, but I'll provide some more detail now. The NEST provides Australia's first evidence-based framework for national child and youth wellbeing. It was developed in consultation with about 4,000 Australians, many of them young people. The NEST presents the evidence for proving that for an Australian child to truly thrive, they must have wellbeing in the 6 interlocking domains that I mentioned earlier. It is central to the approach of everything we do at ARACY and has informed the document we're talking about now. It is also increasingly being used by governments. For example, the Tasmanian Government's Child and Youth Wellbeing Framework has its basis in the NEST. Other jurisdictional outcomes frameworks can be directly mapped against the NEST domains. Given its underpinning evidence, national reach and proven practicality in the field, we suggest the NEST is the perfect framework upon which to base a national policy framework and corresponding action and implementation plans. To ensure its currency and accessibility, we also recommend ongoing funding to keep the NEST evidence up to date and to make it easily available through information portals such as our What Works for Kids website. This website was developed in partnership with Australia's leading prevention science experts. Our next recommendation is also concerned with evidence. ARACY recommends that the next Australian government utilise a range of tools to design and monitor the efficacy of government-funded programs for children and families. These would include social randomised control trials, longitudinal data collections, and rapid-fire try, test and learn models. We also welcome the suggestion made recently to establish an Office of the Evaluator General to lead an emerging impact measurement culture across all government departments. ARACY hopes that regardless of which party forms the next government, the policy will be implemented. Earlier I spoke about ARACY's to have and to have not report, and the fact that it shows financial disadvantage impacts on all areas of a child's wellbeing, and that kids in homes where no one works have the toughest time. We have steadfastly joined the push to have the rate of New Start raised. This is not some bleeding heart endeavour. Support has come from the likes of former Prime Minister John Howard and groups as diverse as ACOS and the Business Council of Australia. ARACY is now in a position to join this push because we've been able to produce the evidence that proves our punitive unemployment benefit system is adding to the hardship of Australia's kids. It's doing so unfairly. These children have no choice in the homes to which they're born. It's doing so needlessly. The low rate of New Start can never work as an incentive for people with complex needs to find a job. And we know this because according to the ABS, there is just one job available for every 8 people looking. For the sake of Australia's children, it is past time, to raise the rate. And we call on the next Australian government to do so. The To Have and To Have Not report also found that children with disability are significantly more likely to face a range of deprivations. These include social exclusion at school. A review of 280 studies in 25 countries found strong evidence that inclusive education benefits kids with disability as well as their classmates without disability. A review of inclusive education in Australia also found that while all jurisdictions provide full inclusion into mainstream education, this is applied inconsistently. In light of this evidence, ARACY urges the next Australian government, through COAG and funding agreements with non-government education systems, to adopt a national approach to establish a more inclusive education system with adequate resourcing. Our next recommendation goes to lifting educational performance through improving parent and community engagement in our kids' learning. I want to pause here and acknowledge the wonderful new campaign, It Takes a Village, led by the Community Council of Australia. This campaign reminds us that we all play a part in the education of children and young people. If you're yet to see it, check it out. Beyond campaigns, though, our recommendation goes a step further. We recommend the next Australian government invest in building an Australian evidence base to look at how parents can help their children develop essential executive functioning skills. These skills are the air traffic control that help us to plan, focus, remember instructions, and juggle tasks. They are the not-so-soft skills essential for achievement. We make this recommendation because we are aware of promising trials being conducted in the US by Harvard University. We are aware that they are looking for international partners. We are aware that there is a need in Australia for new approaches, and particularly new approaches based on robust evidence. But we are also aware these approaches must be tailored to unique Australian circumstances, for example, the circumstances of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. There is a great opportunity here for us to make strides in parent and community engagement by being part of something bigger, something robust, something international. We call on the next Australian government not to let this opportunity pass. Our next recommendation continues to focus on assisting parents. We know children thrive at home and at school when their parents are supported. And I have already alluded to the evidence of the importance of the early years. But at the end of the day, we know very little about how parents are faring and what support they need to help them better help their children. To remedy this, we propose a national expansion of the highly successful Parenting Today in Victoria survey, which was led by our friends at the Parenting Research Centre. This new national survey, Parenting Today in Australia, would monitor trends in parents' experiences over time. It would also help us understand the complexities of modern parenting and parents' own beliefs about the way they raise their kids. We know that good policy is always preceded by good information. This would provide rich information upon which to develop policy and make effective investments in helping families and helping kids. We recommend the next Australian government fund Parenting Today in Australia. Continuing our focus on assisting parents, we now turn to those in adversity and the need to get it right in the first 1,000 days. This is particularly the case for families doing it tough. While the risks for kids in these circumstances are great, there are evidence-based programs that can make a cost-effective difference. An example is nurse home visiting, and specifically the Right at Home program. Right at Home is a partnership between ARACY, Western Sydney University and the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. The program was developed through the philanthropic support of our partners, the Ian Potter Foundation, the Sydney Myer Fund, the Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation, and the Sabimo Trust. And I want to acknowledge and publicly thank them for their ongoing support of the Right at Home program. It provides 25 nurse home visits over a baby's first 2 years. Right at Home has been tested through the largest randomised control trial of nurse home visiting in Australian history, involving more than 700 families. Results to age 2 show the program assists mothers with important parenting skills. These include regular mealtimes and bedtimes, ensuring the child is safe at home, providing warmer, less hostile parenting, and making the home a better learning environment. There are also early signs that the program helps improve the mental health of mums. This in itself is a key outcome that we have to look at more fully. Right at Home has recently featured in the official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences. If you're interested in seeing these publications or on learning more about Right at Home, again, please visit ARACY's website to find out more information. The Right at Home Consortium will continue to collect data about all of our trial families until the children reach 6, when we can study the impact the program has had on their preparedness to start and, importantly, succeed at school. ARACY urges the next Australian government to take national leadership in funding the rollout of evidence-based nurse home visiting programs like Right at Home across Australia. Because our kids don't vote, they are in many ways voiceless. Voicelessness increases with marginalisation, dispossession, and poverty. Therefore, there are few more voiceless than Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and their families. This is perhaps why major national tragedies that affect these children pass largely unreported and beyond the attention of mainstream Australia. The 2018 ARACY report card found that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are more than 3 times more likely to commit suicide than their non-Indigenous peers. Yet this hardly rates a mention. And according to SNAICC, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are 11 times more likely to be removed by child protection authorities and placed in out-of-home care. After more than 200 years, we are learning the best sources of solutions for problems faced by Indigenous Australians is Indigenous Australians. We know services that respect, understand, work with, and are based in culture are vital. We also know that where this is not the case, families are more likely to see the service as not culturally safe and ultimately not use it. That's why ARACY supports SNAICC's call for increased investment in quality Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander controlled early years services. That's why we support their call for the development of a partnership agreement and a national comprehensive Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children's strategy. And that's why we support their call for funding to reduce the massive overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children living in out-of-home care. In a nation as rich as Australia, to me, it is simply not tolerable that every child does not have the same chance to reach their potential. We must all continue to work to change this. That work includes developing documents like this. It includes making sure those in our sector and those in high office cannot help but take notice. With the help of our partners and members, ARACY continues to work at this. That's why we've scheduled this series of webinars over the coming weeks, in which we and partners, including the Smith family, SNAICC, Playgroups Australia, the Consumers Health Forum of Australia, and others will broadcast what we see as the priorities for children for the next Australian government. I'd ask you to join us in this work also. Please tune in to as many of our webinars as you can. They are all free. Tune in and share them with your colleagues. I'd also ask you to take a copy of They Don't Vote, But They Do Matter from our website and share it widely. Share it with your colleagues, share it with those in power and those seeking it. Share it with your local member. Share it with ministers at all levels of government. Share it with the bureaucrats with whom you work. Share it. Our children, they don't vote, but they do matter. And it behooves each of us here today to ensure that those in and those seeking high office don't forget. Thanks for your time and your attention. It's been a real privilege for me to be able to go through this document with you and to share ARACY's vision for what the future for Australian children could look like.
Thank you, Penny. It's Paul here again from ARACY. Unusually, we don't have many questions coming through at this point. Penny's done such a comprehensive job. I'm sure there's some questions out there, but there is one there's a comment that's come through, and I'll ask you to address it, Penny.
Sure.
In talking about Right at Home, we mostly talk about mums, helping mums, the mental health of mums, and we have had a comment that it'd be great to use some more inclusive language. I think, though, the study may have focused on mums more than dads and so on, so I just wonder if you could address that briefly.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that we're really conscious of as well, and to be honest, the Right at Home program itself is specifically designed to work with mums, and that's based on a whole heap of literature that was reviewed when we were putting the program together, but it is something that has consistently come out as we've been working with these families about the vital and often underplayed role that dads and other caregivers have in programs like Right at Home. It's just not what Right at Home itself was looking at. We've explored a number of opportunities with partners over the years about how we might be able to take some of the learnings from what we found doing Right at Home and apply those to different caregivers or primary caregivers. And look, I'd be really excited to talk to people who are keen to figure out how we might be able to do that going forward. But no, Right at Home itself was specifically designed to target mums.
Thanks, Penny. You also talked a lot about RCTs and I think some international work that's been going on. I wonder if you could tease out a bit more exactly what that's looking like at the moment and how that might pan out in Australia. Yeah,
look, there's a few areas in which there are some exciting things happening internationally in the space of these social randomised controlled trials. And to be honest, it's something that ARACY is really keen to continue exploring. So we know, and I mentioned in my talk, that Harvard University, particularly around this area of improving executive functioning with young people, has designed some fabulous programs that have gone into people's homes and worked with young people and their families to engage them better in those skill areas, and have designed experimental techniques to actually understand the impact of what they're doing. And what we're asking for in our policy ask really is, for the Australian government to fund organisations like ARACY to do that work here in Australia. And there's a lot of work to be done in those executive functioning areas. We've also been looking at other things that we'd love to be running social randomised control trials about around other forms of home visiting. There's a lot of things there's a big pool of evidence out there that we just need the opportunity to try, test and learn about in the Australian context.
Thanks, Penny. The questions are rolling in thick and fast now. There's a good one here from Adele. How do you think community programs can promote student voice to ensure children have a voice despite not voting? I suspect a great example of that is the climate change school strikes, but there may be others.
We are so excited about the Strike for Climate work that's been happening by young people across the country, and we have put out our support publicly in support of those, and I think dismayed a little about the lack of support from our political leaders on that. Look, we are aware that there are some people out there who are doing really good voice of children and young people work. The National Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell, has done a beautiful piece of work collecting a whole heap of opinions by young people. And I think that one of the things that we as people who are working with communities and with young people directly have the power to do is when we're thinking about how we evaluate our programs or how we capture what we've done with these groups, to always make sure that we include an element that does that very thing and goes straight to the young people themselves. We're in the process of doing some work internally here at ARACY about producing a paper that talks about how that could look, what best examples of what collecting children's voice could look like. Not something that we have available immediately, probably something that's going to be ready towards the end of the year. But as I said, lots of other people are doing some really fabulous work in that area.
Thanks, Penny. There's another question here about where the focus of the priority lies, and the question assumes that most of our priorities are focused on the early years. I'm not sure that's quite true in this document. You might want to talk to that. But also, the second half of the question is, what does the evidence say about what works best for supporting young people, especially those showing signs of educational disengagement? I would have thought this is a perfect opportunity to talk about the Parent Engagement Project.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, look, I don't want the recommendations to be just early years. I think there are a number of recommendations or priorities in there that are specifically about the early years, but and certainly the Right at Home is a good example of that. But we know, and I'll quote my good friend George Patton, who says it regularly, that whilst the early years are really important, the next best opportunity is for kids in that middle years bracket. And we really see many of these recommendations reaching not just into the early years, but into those middle years areas as well. And I guess underinvestment in areas like the middle years is something that we will continue to advocate for with government, both here in the Commonwealth, but we're doing a lot of advocacy through state and territory governments around that vital middle years area as well. And I would encourage everyone to include that amongst their advocacy asks, that middle years area. Sorry, Paul, the next part of that was?
So it's about what evidence, what does the evidence say that what works for kids that are showing disengagement at school?
Yeah, look,
or educational disengagement.
Yeah,
broadly.
Absolutely. So as I've indicated in my talk today, we know that kids thrive at school when their parents are supported, and we know that one of the most powerful things a parent can do is actually be involved in their child's education and their learning. And when we say education and learning, we are deliberate in that differentiation, because school and face-to-face learning through the school sector is one thing, but education goes beyond that into the learning that we do in our home environments and the learning that we do through just general activity with our kids. And we know from a whole heap of research that we've done, that's been done by our international partners, that if we get that parent engagement piece right, kids do stay engaged in school, they do better, and it can actually alleviate other factors like poverty, which can lead to poorer outcomes for kids in their education. ARACY has been working for the last 4 years now on a major piece of work with the Commonwealth Government, exploring what good parent engagement looks like, but what it looks like for a family, what it looks like for a school to be able to create an environment that supports good parent engagement. We're hoping that, again, that those resources will be out there and available towards the end of this year, and we have a series of webinars that we'll run once those resources are available if people are really keen to hear about parent engagement and what they can be doing.
Great. There's another question here, and for my role in the advocacy part of the business, I'm very pleased to see it. The question is, besides sharing the readings, how else can we get involved and help support this important work? And we could probably chat about that jointly. But,
yeah, sure.
But the sky's the limit with sharing this stuff and getting politicians to take notice, and not just politicians. If you know someone in the philanthropic funding area, send them a copy as well. But politicians there's a federal election coming. They're keen for attention, and whilst there's 150 members of the House of Representatives and 76 senators, there's at least double or triple that number of candidates now, because all those people are vying for a spot. So if you want to know who your Member of Parliament is or your Senator, you can find contact details from them on the Australian Parliament House website, aph.gov.au. Each of them has some way of contacting them, usually electronically. So that's a great start. If you want to know who your local member is, you can look on the AEC website, aec.gov.au. That will tell you, just tap in your postcode or where you're based, and that will tell you who your local member is. But also, as I say, there's all these candidates out there who are unknown. If you contacted a local candidate and offered them a scone to come into your office and buttonhole them about the work you're doing and this work, I suspect you'd probably get a nibble, if not a full-blown bite. And every MP at the moment is a candidate. Every MP, particularly with what is shaping up to be a fairly close election, is vying very hard for their seat. So it's going to be reasonably, there's a lot of calls on their attention, but if you make the case that, what you actually want to talk to them about is the future of children in their electorate, that's usually a pretty strong message. You can also talk to local media. If there's local media in, if you're in, say, Launceston and 7LA is still on the air, for example, give them a ring, offer to do an interview about this work and the work you're doing, either as an individual or as an organisation. Or if you don't feel
comfortable, dob us in, because that's the sort of thing that we're happy to do.
We'll be happy to talk to them as well. So, offer your local members a morning tea to find out who the candidates are. That will increasingly become apparent because some of them still aren't totally available. But I know that I've had a look on the ALP website, alp.org.au. They've got all their candidates now up for the lower house. The Liberal Party has most of its candidates up, certainly got all its sitting members, so you can find their contact details again. And it's probably been a week since I looked at their site. I wouldn't be surprised if it's fully populated. The Australian Greens Party likewise has got a lot of their candidates already up on their website. So they're actually pretty easy to track down, and a lot of them will be very hungry to engage with organisations, particularly organisations who are interested in talking about the future of Australia, vis-a-vis, young children and young people in Australia. So the sky's the limit pretty much on that. If we can help in any way with that, please just jump on our website. There's some contact details there. I'd be happy to try and give you any assistance I can, having been in this field for some time. So my name's Paul Kinderman. I'm the Comms and Advocacy Manager here at ARACY, and if I can assist in any way, I'd be happy to try and help. So please just give us drop me an email, or just get on the website and find out how to give us a bell. That'd be good.
Yeah, and I would just add to that one of the reasons why we've made this series of election webinars free to everybody, not just to ARACY members, was because we wanted them to be shareable. We wanted these things to be able to be things that you could put in your newsletters, in your tweets, in everything, all of your own communications activities. So at the end of today, our fabulous comms team are going to pull all of the input from this webinar together. It'll be available in the next day or so, and then we would encourage you to put it out to your networks. So it doesn't have to be politicians, as you say, or candidates, but the power of organisations like ARACY is we have a reach to a network of people, and we know that our network has its own networks of people. So we would strongly encourage everyone to share the document and to include it in your conversations, whatever they may be.
Yeah, thanks. Good point, Penny. So our e-bulletin that comes out every Friday, if you haven't subscribed already, you can do so by going to our our web page. There's a subscribe button on that. We send out an e-bulletin every Friday, and those will contain links to these webinars. We'll also be Twittering them, so please follow us on Twitter, and you can share that content from there as well. So there's a number of ways, a number of channels available to get the word out. And thanks for asking the question. It's really important. There's a unique opportunity during an election year to make a noise on behalf of the kids of Australia, and we should do everything we can to take that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Okay, what else have we got in the question basket here? Look, we are getting some questions about data on Indigenous children, and we haven't got our statistician here today, so I'm gonna have an attempt to answer this. But in short, what's in LSAC and what's in LSIC? There's two data sets. One focusing on Indigenous kids, one focusing on non-Indigenous kids, or it may include Indigenous kids. I don't fully know. As I say, our statistician isn't here today. But basically, discussions were that there weren't enough. It wasn't representative enough for us to draw proper conclusions. There simply aren't enough Indigenous kids being followed longitudinally for us to draw conclusions that you could, point to with any robustness. So one of the key recommendations in the earlier report, to have and to have not, so that's the deprivation report that in part informed the election document, Our Children, They Don't Vote, But They Do Matter, one of the key recommendations in that is to improve data in LSIC and in LSAC and make them join up better and make it more representative so that that can actually be a truly useful and representative source of data. So
I might just add to that if I can, Paul, and talk about data a little bit. Look, data is an ongoing issue, and it's an ongoing issue in relation to children. It's an ongoing issue in relation to young people, and it's an ongoing issue in relation to parents. Now, we have pulled out the recommendation or the priority around parenting today in Australia, just because parenting information is so lacking at the moment. But there are certainly a lot of other things that can be done to improve data in relation to children and young people. Consistency of data, consistency of definitions, the use and better funding of data collections, higher prioritisation of collecting data about children and young people through our national statistics agencies. We know, and I said it in my talk and I'll say it again and I'm going to keep saying it forever, is that we cannot possibly think about writing and putting together good quality policy if we don't have the data, the good quality data, national data, that will inform that process. And I know that there are a number of policymakers who have joined us today, and I'm really excited to have seen all of your names and your email addresses in the registrations. And I think each and every one of those people would agree with me that their job is so much better and so much easier to do when the data is available to them. So much work to be done around data. And I know that there's work that's currently underway through the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare and through many of our partner organisations, some of whom are probably online today, to try and do that work. But there is still a lot to be done.
Great, thank you, Penny. We are starting to run out of questions, so I think we might call it a day. There's a general question. Look, we'll finish on this. There's a general question. I just don't know we've done any specific thinking about it, so I'm not sure how much we can add.
I can think on my feet, Paul.
But you can think on your feet. But we've just been asked about technology in supporting parents, and I guess this might come out of the learnings from the parent survey, but given technology is so much a part of our world, and I guess is increasingly becoming a part of literacy at schools, do we have any views on supporting parents with technology, through technology?
Oh, it is interesting, and I am thinking on my feet, so please don't necessarily quote me on what I'm about to say, but it is not something that's new to us as an organisation, and certainly not new to many of the conversations I've been having. Technology is very much a double-edged sword. There are people who are in favour of technology as a support mechanism. There are people who would speak against that, and I don't know where the evidence lies one way or another. But there are a number of really good and useful support pieces of technology for parents. The one that immediately comes to mind is one that our colleagues at the Department of Education have pulled together. It's the Learning Potential app, and it provides a whole heap of information about parent engagement. We've provided many pieces to the team in putting together the content for this app. And I mean, I can't speak to, I don't have the data, and I'm not sure how much it's utilised, but I know that what's sitting behind it is of good quality. So there are examples out there where technology is being used and I think having good outcomes, but I think likewise we have to be mindful that not everybody wants to embrace technology as the answer to their concerns, and we need to have a variety of support options available to everybody.
Indeed. On technology, you get some people saying that it's the worst thing ever, and then you've got, for example, the ACT government making sure every child has a tablet at school, basically.
Yeah. And look, I think we're a long way from being really comfortable saying that the evidence is one way or another.
All right. Look, that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you to everyone who has attended today, and thank you for your questions. And look, other questions may percolate into your minds as time goes by, and if they do, because this is an ARACY-run webinar, we're particularly able to engage further and take further questions. So you'll see on your screens there's an inquiries@aracy.org.au email. If you've got further questions for us, or indeed if we can help with spreading the word, or if you've got ideas about local politicians or media or anyone else who would like to, who you think should be seeing this policy document, please drop us a line and we'll do our best to answer questions and engage with you as quickly as we possibly can. So thank you. That brings us to the end of this webinar. Thank you, Penny. Very nicely explained. Thank you. So as we mentioned earlier, the recording of this webinar will be available hopefully from Friday this week, and we'll be putting it out in our e-bulletin and on our Twitter, and it'll be available on our website. So please share far and wide. And as we also said, this is the first in a series of election webinars we'll be running over the next several weeks. We'll be putting some more details out in this Friday's e-bulletin about who's speaking when. But basically, as Penny said earlier, we're asking some major organisations in Australia to tell us in the heat of the coming election debate what they want to see politicians talking about, what they want to see politicians doing, and what they want to see the next Australian government do to assure the welfare of Australia's kids going forward. So that's it from us today. Thank you again to everyone who's attended, and we look forward to receiving your questions via the email. Thanks, Penny.
Thank you.